Good evening. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to come and address all of you. Um, so I just I want to touch upon five different aspects and speak about this. But to begin with, when we talk about the injustice to the Babri Masjid, I think that the previous speakers have already highlighted how the Supreme Court's judgment enshrined majoritarian Hindutva demands as a principle of Indian law. And this capitulation from the highest court in the land came um, either because of a recognition of Hindu Rashtra overtones or because of a fear of violent backlash and an abdication of the state's duty to do justice. And I also think that when we have been discussing, I have been following this quite closely and with as much Hindi as I can understand. I also feel that in speaking about the Supreme Court judgment of November 2019, we should not forget to speak about this special court of CBI, special CBI court's judgment in October 2020, which basically acquitted everybody who was involved in the demolition of the Babri Masjid, saying that there was no evidence or that the evidence was tampered with. So we have a case in which the lack of evidence does not prevent uh, somebody to give the land for the construction of a temple. The Supreme Court judgment itself does not contain any evidence on the birthplace of Ram. And at the same time, despite documented evidence, despite photographic evidence, despite video evidence, all of this from 1992, despite the fact that this hate was the result of a long-running campaign to demolish the masjid, to build this temple. What happens is that they are let go for the lack of evidence. So I think we have to talk about both of these at the same time. And I think there are many worrying aspects which others have touched upon, which is the fact that this is a problem that ails not only this judgment, but the rest of Hindutva in India, which is the collapse of mythology and history. That not understanding that the figurehead of Ram belongs to the realm of mythology and it should not be treated as history. Whereas the masjid there is very much a historical fact. It stood very much before our eyes and has been standing for the last 400 years. And there are also aspects that defeat not only common sense, but also this aspect of natural justice, because although there is no evidence, one of the arguments by Hindutva is that building a mosque on the temple was an act of hate. There's no evidence that there was a temple before, at least according to the Archaeological Survey of India. But if this is going to be the guideline principle, how can the Supreme Court of India say that you can build a temple on the remains of a demolished mosque? Isn't that an act of hate? So, can a judgment itself constitute an offense? And these are questions that I think should be taken up for public debate, should be articulated by the majority community, or let's say the Hindu community in this country, because it involves you. So, having said this introduction, there are five issues that I want to really highlight. The first is, of course, how does Pegasus come into all of this? And I think this is quite important to speak about. And I speak about this not as a legal expert, but as somebody who is very concerned about individual privacy in this country. And also the fact that the state has deployed surveillance on the highest offices of the land, including that of the Supreme Court. So, on the one hand, we see that the Supreme Court has legalized a Hindutva demand by basically gifting the land to the Ramlala Foundation, by also being shrouded in secrecy. The name of the judge who authored the judgment was not being revealed, and also the judge, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who headed the Constitution bench, the same Constitution bench that heard the Ayodhya Babri Masjid case, became a Rajya Sabha MP hardly 4 months after his retirement. So, and in the same way, the CBI Special Courts Judge Yadav was also appointed as a deputy Lokayuta for UP, and these are not small postings. So, these are questions that make you relook at the judgment in terms of what happens afterwards. But most importantly, and this is where I think the question of Pegasus comes. So Pegasus is a cyber weapon. Pegasus is sold by the Israeli NSO group, and it's sold only to governments, and it can monitor everything, every activity that goes on in your phone. Now, the interesting thing is, uh, in April 2019, there are allegations of sexual harassment against the Chief Justice of India, and a few days after these allegations surface, she and 11 members of her family are put under the scanner. They are put under Pegasus. And eventually, what happens is the CGI appoints a Supreme Court committee which clears him of these charges. And in this happens in April, and then in May, the Supreme Court committee clears him of charges, and in November, the judgment comes. The question is that if the state was meddling with the affairs of what's happening in the Supreme Court, if the state was listening in on conversations of a staffer of the Supreme Court, the question we have to ask is what happens to judicial independence? How independent was the judiciary, given that the Chief Justice at the time was facing charges, which was in front of the national media? What actually happened? Was there interference? Was his independence ever compromised? These are questions that a lay person can ask, and everyone has the right to ask questions. And I think, given that we have now placed Pegasus in the center of our discourse, and the fact that our MPs are speaking about it, I think there is an important necessity to revisit these judgments which were given when Pegasus was used on Supreme Court judges, staffers, and other people related to the Chief Justice of India, either through an allegation or through other means. So I think this is quite an important. This is the first point I wanted to say. The second point for me is that the Hindu community in this country, and especially those who are committed to caste annihilation or committed to other social issues, should also understand what are the fallouts of this judgment. So the masjid does not stand, and the question is the masjid, what is natural justice? But going beyond the question of the masjid, there are things that are happening to India that you just cannot ignore. So one of those things is recently in mid-October, the tourism minister in Gujarat announced that any tribal person, any Adivasi person who visits Ayodhya from Gujarat will be given rupees 5,000. Now, this is not a Hindu-Muslim issue. We know that Adivasi religion predates Hinduism, it predates Islam, and that their beliefs are much more ancient than other religious beliefs. So the question is, 5,000 rupees for Adivasi people to visit Ayodhya. Isn't this a kind of saffronization of Adivasi people? Isn't this a question of, isn't this directly tied to BJP's electoral politics? Isn't this something that wants to erode the Adivasi identity and to merge them under the Hindu fold? And this is not a negligible question, because Adivasi people form 14% of the population of Gujarat. So it's also a question of BJP's vote bank and other things. And I think this is something. And recently, when Aam Aadmi Party was campaigning in Goa, I think Arvind Kejriwal said that Hindus from Goa will be taken to Ayodhya. So Ayodhya is also coming to the forefront in the national imagination as a holy place, even though its history as a temple site is something just hardly started now. And the other question is also, will the Indian Hindu community in this country, and I know that I'm speaking on a PFI platform, but I really want to address the Hindus of this country, because all of this is done in your name, all of this is done in my name, all of this is done in our name, and therefore the onus to oppose Hindutva also has to come from Hindu people. And this is why the question is, there is a playbook attempt to copy what has happened in Ayodhya in places like Mathura and Kashi. And in Mathura already they have given a civil suit trying to talk about Krishna Janmasthan, and saying that the Eidgah mosque must be demolished because this originally was the birthplace of Krishna. And just as Babur was vilified in the narratives about Ayodhya, in Mathura, the person being vilified is Aurangzeb. And the question here is that, will we allow, if every single site where a Muslim mosque stands is converted into some kind of Hindu mythology, and there is a claim, what do we do? Do we want such hate to, transform, become exponential? And I think this is our responsibility as Hindus to stand up and say, no, not in my name. And just because you allowed one historical travesty and tragedy to happen, we have to also ensure that this does not repeat, as much as we also have to ensure that justice is done to the Muslim people who are affected because of the demolition of the mosque. the mosque. And then come, there are last, I just wanted to say the last 2 points. One is that mainstream parties in India, and they have to really be called out for this, are constantly peddling a version of soft Hindutva. I don't think that soft Hindutva is going to be the counter to BJP's Hindutva. So, and this is very shameful, and especially for somebody who comes from Tamil Nadu, where the mood and the climate is really different. And, we have Tamil politicians, including Dr. Tirma, who just addressed us, people who believe that that there was injustice carried out. But we also have people like, the Congress, for instance, in UP, leading a donation drive for the temple. In Madhya Pradesh, there were Congress leaders asking for a donation drive for the temple. And I think that this is something, again, that, people have to be wary about, like, how much are you going to co-opt the BJP project? And there is something more interesting happening to Hinduism, which is my next point, which is that whatever was called Hinduism was about diversity of opinions. So you could be a Periyar and critique Ram. You could be a person from South India and have the opinion that, the defeat of Ravan was the defeat of the Dravidians. You could talk about, Ram belonging to the Vaishnava order, and Ravana being a Shaivite, and the clash of Vaishnavism versus Shaivism. So this allowed, a multiplicity of religious beliefs, religious opinions. But right now, what is happening under Hindutva is an essential flattening, an essential rallying, and the kind of things that Ambedkar could say in, let's say, the riddles of Hinduism. These are opinions that you just cannot say, and that space is now occupied by silences. And this consensus building is coming at a heavy cost, and the heavy cost is that, for instance, when there was a donation drive for the temple, and they say that they have raised about 3,000 crores or some huge amount of money. It was also that homes were basically having stickers outside saying which home had contributed and which home did not contribute. And this is, again, really, really risky, not only risky for the Muslim people of this country, but also for Hindus who refuse to adopt Hindutva, the Hindus who stand out and who want to, have a pushback against it. So it is openly dangerous what is going on in the name of this temple. And this has been going on for the last not only 30 years, but for far longer period. And finally, just as I want to say that this is a danger for rationalism, I also want to say what has happened with the image of Lord Ram. So the thing is that there is no, we cannot talk about Babri Masjid without talking about what is happening to the construction of Ram, the public imagination of Ram, the way he is portrayed as a warrior, but also the way he is portrayed as somebody upholding Sanatana Dharma, the way he is portrayed as somebody who upholds caste Hindu patriarchy, as somebody who suspects his wife, as somebody who wants to uphold the caste order to such a level that he orders the killing of Shambhuka. So he is a very contentious figure. Ram has always been a very contentious figure for the lower caste people, for the Shudras, for the Dalits, for women. Everybody will agree that they don't have anything to share with his treatment of Sita. So now we come to this space where there's only one Ram. And in the name of this Ram, it becomes absolutely legitimate to not only destroy a masjid, which itself is a tragedy, as I said, and which is a wrong and injustice that has to be set right, but it also forces people to kill. So it's not only the killings of thousands of people in the 1990s that happened in the name of this temple, but also the fact that even as recently, in the Delhi violence of February 2020, more than 9 Muslim men were forced to chant Jai Shri Ram, and they were killed subsequently. So the idea that, what is called Jai Shri Ram, what is supposedly seen as a Hindu chant, what is supposedly seen as a Hindu prayer, is now become a murder cry. And there cannot be anything more dangerous for a religion than your prayer becoming a murderous weapon, becoming something that gives rise to a fascist killing spree. And these are murders that are taking place in the names of Hindu people, in the names of Ram. So I think that there must be an open debate and much more public conversation, and it should be a conversation that Hindus should initiate, and Hindus should also, I think they have both the the guilt and the moral necessity to speak about this issue. And having said that, I thank you so much for trusting me enough to give me an opportunity to speak in this. And thank you so much.